Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching The World Report. Let's first take a look at our top stories. Following the US-Russia peace meeting in Saudi Arabia, US President Donald Trump says Ukraine could have made a deal with Russia to end the war. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has delayed his visit to Saudi Arabia until the 10th of March after saying it was a surprise his country wasn't invited to the talks. Hamas has proposed releasing all dead and alive hostages in exchange for an end to the war, as the group indicates it is ready for talks on stage 2 of the ceasefire deal. 6 living and the bodies of 4 hostages, including 2 children, would be freed in return for hundreds of Palestinian prisoners. The bodies of 23 people have been discovered by Lebanese civil defence forces after the withdrawal of Israeli troops. IDF soldiers have remained in 5 outposts in southern Lebanon, close to the border with Israel. A judge has ruled that Elon Musk's Doge can continue accessing US federal government data as it looks at cutting spending. Trump and Musk held a joint interview stating they plan to restore the will of the people. Residents of South Lebanon returned to devastated villages searching for the bodies of relatives killed in last year's war between Israel and Hezbollah as Israeli troops withdrew from most of the territory. Israeli Foreign Minister Gideon Saar said Israel would complete its withdrawal from the south on Tuesday to meet a deadline set under a US-backed ceasefire, but that it would remain in 5 outposts for its security. Meanwhile, according to the Lebanese Civil Defence, 23 bodies from several border towns have been recovered after the IDF withdrawal. More recovery is awaited, with the civil agencies given the opportunity to cover new ground as the troop withdrawal takes place. Joining us first to discuss this topic, we're joined by Lev Aran, a former coordinator of Israel-India Parliamentary Friendship League, joining us from Israel. Lev, thank you very much for your time. I want to look now at us moving forward and Israel moving forward. What will it take for Israel to be happy with the situation in Lebanon, given the fact that forces are remaining, of course, along the border?
Look, the road ahead is still fraught with uncertainty because on one hand, it is crystal clear that both Lebanon and Israel want peace. And also it is crystal clear that Lebanon knows that Israel has no appetite for a single square inch of Lebanese territory. So in this sense, everything is clear. On the other hand, it is not the first time that Lebanon and Israel have a ceasefire. And the last time that we had a ceasefire with Lebanon, Hezbollah hobbled it and built tunnels, bunkers, missiles, guerrillas, and so on. So Israel hopes, and they also think that the new establishment and the new president in Lebanon also hopes, that the fact that Iran lost 4 countries of proxies, also it will lead to a weaker Hezbollah that will not be able, to avoid the peace between Lebanon and Israel at this stage.
Lev, I'd like to stay with you and look at the influence of Iran. We know that flights between Iran and Lebanon have been cancelled, with a potential risk of funds being transported through that means in terms of that then getting to Hezbollah. Is Hezbollah in a position to regroup, and what would that mean for Israel?
Look, Hezbollah had a continuity of 3,000 kilometers of pro-Shia and pro-Iranian forces from Lebanon up to Iran. So in a way, the fact that now Syria is a pro-Sunni country and not a pro-Shia country, so this continuum is disconnected. So we see a weaker Iran and we see a weaker Hezbollah, and we can hope that thanks to this, Hezbollah will not be able to avoid very important processes that we see, including IMEC from Mumbai to Haifa to Europe.
Yes, also joining us to discuss these developments is Professor Rohan Gunaratne, who is a Middle East expert joining us from Singapore. Professor Gunaratne, thank you very much for your time. I want to now shift our attention towards the humanitarian situation in southern Lebanon. Lebanese civil forces have found 23 bodies with a chance of them finding more. What does this mean for the communities of those southern Lebanese areas?
The people of Lebanon should understand that Israel mounted attacks with the specific intention of decimating the Lebanese Hezbollah organization and decapitating the leadership. IDF did not attack civilians. Of course, there were civilian fatalities and injuries because the Lebanese Hezbollah used the Lebanese civilian areas to headquarter and build their presence. What is important is to look at the future. If Hezbollah again revives and regroups and attacks Israel, Israel will once again strike back. Israel has today maintained 5 outposts on Lebanese territory to ensure its own security. So Hezbollah is likely to be dismantled in the coming months and coming years, although it's very much entrenched in Lebanon. Why would it be dismantled? Because the Lebanese military is being supported by the United States, and US does not want Lebanese Hezbollah to be a significant entity. Israel will also do everything it can to disrupt the reorganization of Lebanese Hezbollah, including support from Iran.
Yes, and staying with you, Professor Gunaratne, is there, do you think, a concern potentially for those people returning to southern Lebanon that what remains of Hezbollah could come back in some way and lead to further fighting and potentially further displacement as they return to areas which have been not necessarily decimated but not similar to what they left?
There is significant support still for Hezbollah from within the Shia community in Lebanon. It is very likely that Hezbollah will re-establish a presence because they have infiltrated the civilian community, and that means there will be hostility from those communities and from those groups in southern Lebanon in the future towards Israel, and Israel will fight back. So there will never be permanent peace. There will be truces, there will be bouts of conflict, and there will be bouts of peace.
Professor Gunaratne, thank you very much for your time. Also, thank you to Lev Aaron for joining us. We now move to Africa and the Democratic Republic of Congo, an African nation which has been devastated by infighting and war. Rwandan-backed M23 rebels have attacked the Democratic Republic of Congo's army positions in the South Kivu province. This comes just days after East and Southern African bloc leaders called for an immediate and unconditional ceasefire. Meanwhile, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights have accused the M23 rebels of carrying out the execution of children. In a recently released statement, he stated that there were confirmed cases of summary execution of children by M23 after they entered the city of Bukavu last week. Meanwhile, Burundian soldiers who have been fighting Rwandan-backed M23 rebels in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo are pulling out following the fall of the city of Bukavu. Burundi has had soldiers in Eastern Congo for years, initially to hunt down Burundian rebels there, but more recently to aid in the fight against M23. Joining us first to discuss this topic, we have Himanshu Bhatt, who is a senior journalist joining us from Gujarat. Himanshu, thank you very much for being here. We're looking at an ever-evolving situation, but one that is seeing the M23 and Rwandan-backed M23 rebels continuing their move in Congo. There is some talk and some unity within Africa, but what more do you think needs to be done to halt this and bring a ceasefire, which will also end what we're seeing, which is killings and potential murders of children, among others?
Wise. Everything needs to be done. But whether it is being done or not is a question. It might have been done on the paper, but it doesn't translate it on the ground. See, the situation here in a place like DRC, Congo. What you have is a fight for, there's a two-way fight that's going on. One is the local tribesmen, they are fighting. The local tribes, or the local communities, the way we put it here in India, they are fighting. Another thing is, the bigger powers are fighting for the 25 trillion rare earth minerals. And they keep on, flagging things. On one side, you have a French influence. On the other side, you have, Chinese influence. Because China purchases about 70% of the cobalt that DRC produces. So, what happens behind the scenes, it's very, very difficult to predict. Sitting here in Asia and talking about Africa at times becomes very difficult. The reason only for that is some powers have a vested interest along with the tribe's interest. Now here we are talking of, a rebel group taking over something. But what will you do with these Rwandan armies? When they support someone, they get into DRCs. And then people and children, see the actual casualty is the women and the children. In any sort of a conflict zone, the maximum number of people that suffer the most are the women and children. And here also it's the same thing happening. And especially when you talk of sub-Saharan and African countries, where the poverty is to be seen and to be believed, the human rights don't exist. Because when you are not talking of 2 square meals a day, a proper health, forget about health, when we are not talking of 2 square meals a day, what are we talking about human rights and what needs to be done? Can UN do something? Well, if it got the guts and the gumption, it can do, but it will not do. Because it has a French influence. The French is a waning power today in the world. How much of a say France has in the UN? In the world forums, how much of voice does France have? What can it do for Democratic Republic of Congo? That's my basic question sitting outside of Congo. And when we are talking of human rights for the people and the children of Congo, who are getting massacred, who are getting butchered, well, what will you find there? You will find all plans taking place on paper, nothing executed on the ground, and the ground fighting will go on. The rebels and the army will keep on fighting.
Yes,
We'll talk about a day. The next day we'll forget about it. Unfortunately, that's the realistic situation there. And it's all a fight for that, rare earth minerals of 25 trillion. Congo is a very rich country in that sense. But today, if you see their per capita income is what, $712? It's way, way, way below poverty line. That is the basic cause, and that needs to be alleviated.
yes.
The natural resources.
Yes, I'd like to bring it back to the military action, and we have, of course, Major General A.K. Sawatch with us, who is a defence expert. Thank you very much, Major General, for being here. I want to look at the fighting and the military aspect of this. We have, of course, the Democratic Republic of Congo Army, but we also have Rwandan-backed rebels. But then there are also militias that are fighting within the region as well. And recently, within the last couple of days, there's been infighting between the Democratic Republic of Congo's forces and their allied militias. So it feels that at this point, the fighting isn't necessarily one-on-one. It seems that there's fighting breaking out everywhere. And how do global leaders look at this and try and maintain this when it seems that there's a chaotic aspect to the fighting?
The problem in African countries are that they are very rich in the resources, but otherwise they are very poor, and there are a number of factions which are working, and they are fighting against each other. And the problem is that they were mainly ruled by the Europeans once upon a time. Now, mostly the Europeans have gone out, but they still control their resources. And therefore, to get hold of these resources, there is always an infighting going on. You find small forces which are fighting with each other. And at the same time, countries like China and Russia are now trying to build inroads in these areas so that they can gain and exploit the resources here. As far as the Democratic Republic of Congo is concerned, they have a problem in the eastern portion, and where the Rwanda-backed M23, they are the one which are basically operating, and they are the one which are fighting against the DRC army, the Democratic Republic Congo Army. To help them, the Rwandan army had initially come there basically to fight against their own rebels which were operating from the eastern portion of Congo. But now they are helping out DRC to fight against M23, which is being backed by Rwanda. Now the problem comes is the Rwanda is spending a lot of money and they are getting funds from outside agency, and they are giving fund to M23. M23 is a very potent, you can say, extremist group, and of late it has managed to capture Goma, and now also they have the South Kivu and Bukavu. So therefore, it looks like that the eastern portion of DRC is very vulnerable to this M23 backed by the Rwandan. And there was some rumors which were there that basically the Burundi army, which was fighting in DRC, has now going back after there were allegations which were there against M23 that they have executed certain children below 15 years also. But that has been now been ruled out, and the Burundi spokesman has said very clearly that the Burundi army will stay there in DRC and they will fight against M23, which is backed by Rwanda. So I suppose the situation is, you can say, is going in a manner that once it looks like the rebels have got a stronghold, and at the same time it looks like the DRC army, along with the support of basically Burundi army, is having an upper hand. So one can't be very clear, but what has happened is the situation in DRC, the eastern portion especially, is very, very fragile. You find human rights violation taking place. People are very poor. The resources can be exploited by the foreign countries, and all these countries in African continent, they are fighting against each other, and they are made to fight. And you find in each country there are a number of rebels which are there. There are certain rebels which are fighting against each other, or the main country is fighting against these rebels, which being supported by a country which is a neighboring country. So this is an irony, but to me it looks like that the good news is the Burundi army is going to stay put in DRC, and they are fighting against basically M23, which is a Rwanda-backed extremist group, along with the DRC. And I suppose that is a good news in the sense, if M23 manage to capture more area of DRC, in the especially of eastern portion, you will find it, the whole area will then become disturbed, and it will then percolate to Burundi also, and the Rwanda will have an upper hand.
Yes, Major General Sawatch, very quickly before we move on, do you think this requires peacekeeping forces from other nations, and if so, where could they come from?
Absolutely. See, there were a United Nations peacekeeping force, but of late they have been not also very successful. But I certainly say that if you want a peace for a long term, you want a United Nations peacekeeping force from places other than African continent. I suppose there are Asian countries like India, you find even Bangladesh, Nepal, they are ready to send their peacekeeper there. I suppose that's a step in a right direction. There were a UN peacekeeping force, but the strength has to be increased, and especially the eastern portion, which has now become very vulnerable due to M23 attacking the eastern portion backed by the Rwandan army. There is a requirement of UN peacekeeping force, and which should be of a strength, which should be able to fight against M23 rebels which are backed by the Rwandan army.
Major General Sawatch and Himanshu, thank you very much for both joining us. We now move on, and US President Donald Trump and billionaire Elon Musk featured in their first joint interview since the election win. During the interview with Fox News, Trump praised Musk as his enforcer-in-chief. On the other hand, the White House clarified that Elon Musk is a senior advisor and not part of any government department. Here are the full updates.
US President Donald Trump and billionaire Elon Musk featured in their first joint interview since the election. During the interview with Fox News, Trump praised Musk as his enforcer-in-chief for executing his executive orders after returning to office. Elon Musk, Trump's top donor in the 2024 campaign, was appointed to lead the new Department of Government Efficiency, aiming to tackle waste in federal spending. Musk stated its main role is ensuring presidential executive orders are carried out.
Those executive orders, I sign them, and now they get passed on to him and his group and other people, and they're all getting done. We're getting them done.
The interviews come hours after Trump signed an executive order to strengthen White House control over federal regulatory agencies. The order, which may face legal challenges, asserts that executive power should be overseen by the elected president for accountability. Musk, whose role is often questioned, defended himself, stating he is helping implement Trump's agenda, not acting as president, and emphasized that Trump represents the people's will.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't asked the president for anything ever.
And if it comes up, how will you handle it?
Well,
He won't be involved.
yeah, I'll recuse myself if it is.
If there's a conflict, he won't be involved.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't want that, and he won't want it.
On the other hand, the White House on Monday clarified that Elon Musk is a senior advisor, not part of the Department of Government Efficiency. This comes at a time when the Trump administration is facing a lawsuit from Democratic states claiming Musk holds excessive power without being elected or confirmed by the Senate. Bureau Report, NewsX.
We'll now move to Europe for more of the latest news from that continent. Ready to deploy troops to Ukraine if it's requested by the Ukrainian government. This week, 2,500 British soldiers from the 1st Division are participating in a major NATO exercise in Romania, which is just 16 miles from the Ukrainian border. Brigadier Andy Watson, who commands Britain's contribution to the NATO exercise, confirmed that his brigade is fully prepared to deploy if given orders. Discussions about sending troops to Ukraine are currently underway. European leaders have been reacting to the new US stance under President Trump, which includes a willingness to negotiate with Russia over the Ukraine conflict. This shift has led to calls for Europe to boost its own defence spending and consider sending troops to Ukraine. Emergency talks led by French President Macron aimed to present unity, but tensions emerged as German Chancellor Olaf Scholz expressed frustration over calls for troop deployment. Meanwhile, the EU has planned to crack down on food imports that don't meet its standards as part of a new agricultural policy. The move comes after months of farmer protests over unfair competition and regulatory burdens. The European Commission aims to align production standards for imported goods, particularly targeting hazardous pesticides. While the policy aims to reduce tensions, it could spark trade conflicts with US crops like soybeans. Vatican reports say that Pope Francis has been diagnosed with pneumonia in both lungs after suffering from a respiratory infection over the week. His condition remains complex and it requires additional treatments. The Pope, who has a history of lung issues, has cancelled all public events. He thanked well-wishers and asked for prayers as doctors adjusted his treatment. Life expectancy growth across Europe is stalling as England experienced the sharpest slowdown. From 1990 to 2011, life expectancy rose by 0.23 years annually, but this dropped to just 0.15 years from 2011 to 2019. Experts blame poor diets, inactivity and rising obesity for the decline. England saw the largest fall with a 0.1-year drop in life expectancy improvements. Amid ongoing peace talks between Russia and Ukraine, US President Trump has taken aim at Ukraine. He blamed President Zelensky for not making a deal with Russia earlier. Meanwhile, European leaders continue to gather support for Ukraine. What are the other developments? Let's find out in this report.
As Saudi hosted US and Russian officials for a peace deal amid the ongoing war, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has expressed his disappointment.
Будь ласка, можете обговорювати що завгодно, але не можна приймати рішення без України, як завершити війну в Україні. Ті чи інші умови. І нас не запрошували на цю зустріч. російсько-американську зустріч в Саудівській Аравії. Для нас це було сюрпризом, я думаю, так, як і для багатьох.
Responding to his comments, US President Donald Trump counter-blamed Ukraine.
And I'm very disappointed. I hear that, they're upset about not having a seat. Well, they've had a seat for 3 years and a long time before that. This could have been settled very easily. Just a half-baked negotiator could have settled this years ago.
In Riyadh, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov and US Secretary of State Marco Rubio agreed to appoint teams to start negotiating the end of the war. Lavrov said his country would not accept peacekeeping forces from NATO countries in Ukraine under any peace deal. This came as a proposal from the meeting of the European members of NATO for supporting Ukraine. In response, France is set to host a second summit on February 19th to continue discussions of security guarantees for Ukraine. In partnership with the British, France is also ready to consider sending experts or even a limited number of troops beyond the Ukrainian front line. When asked about the European support for Ukraine, Trump said,
If they want to do that, that's great. I'm all for it. If they want to do that, I think that'd be fine.
with such developments, can the peace talks, which President Trump is more confident about, put an end to the war raging for over 2 years? Bureau Report, NewsX.
Now for the latest from the world of business. Japanese trading house Mitsui & Co. announced that it would acquire a 40% stake in the Rio Tinto-operated Rhodes Ridge iron ore project in Western Australia. It will cost $5.34 billion. This is to increase its long-term earning base. Mitsui's 40% stake is projected to yield 16 million tonnes of iron ore a year. This will then rise to more than 40 million tonnes annually upon further expansion. Dutch multinational conglomerate Philips posted a net loss of €698 million for 2024. It posted a €463 million loss in 2023. The conglomerate has been suffering financially over the past couple of years. The CEO listed the decline in demand from China as one reason for the losses. US President Donald Trump says he intends to impose further tariffs, this time on automobiles with similar duties on semiconductors and pharmaceutical imports. Trump has long complained about the treatment meted out to US automotive exports in foreign markets. Trump also announced that he would put 25% or higher tariffs on pharmaceuticals and semiconductors. Spanish banking behemoth Banco Santander will be investing $2 billion in Mexico. This will be over a period of 3 years. After a meeting with Santander CEO Ana Botín, Mexican President Claudia Sheinbaum disclosed the investment sum. Botín highlighted that Mexico has great growth potential, saying that the company wants to invest in it heavily despite potential trade tensions with the US. Elon Musk's company X is in talks to raise money from investors at a $44 billion valuation. Musk bought the platform for the same price back in 2022. However, since that time, X's valuation has tanked. Reportedly, talks for the new financing round are still ongoing. That is all we have time for, but we'll be back very soon with more of your latest world news.